Hi, today I'm going to go through the process of preparing for a fabulous composition. This is video one of three videos of my playlists, and this video goes through the process. The second video is an interview with a student, and we talk about the ideas that she comes up with, how she comes up with those ideas, the problems that she's faced. And the third video is an interview with my colleague, Mr. Vieira, where we go through the marking criteria that the Board of Studies markers use when they're assessing a composition. Okay, so for this video, video one, it's how we prepare a composition. So the first thing we need to do is to organise a portfolio, either on a Word document or you can handwrite it in a book. And a portfolio is all the different research and ideas that you use when you develop your composition. So this information here on the screen is from the Board of Studies. It's for reflection on your processes. It's a record of the planning involved, record of ideas that you use and some that you don't use in developing your compositions, how you resolve problems, any research that you do, and it also is proof that you've actually written this composition, that it's your own work. So it's an important document, and it's from this document is where we start the composition. Okay, step one is to start researching your topic. Now, our example we're going to use is instrument and its repertoire. So we are going to choose an instrument, and that's going to be the main instrument that we're going to concentrate on for this composition. Now, I'm amazed at how many students pick an instrument that they cannot play. Why you would do that, I do not understand. So you really should pick an instrument that you can play. Once you've chosen which instrument that you're going to be researching about, you have to research how you want it to sound. Is it going to be classical based? Is it going to be rock based? Is it going to be jazz based? So if it's rock, what are the stylistic characteristics used in rock guitar, if that was your instruments? And you need to research it, listen to examples that you like, and you add those into your portfolio. What techniques that are stylistic characteristic of this topic? So if it's rock and you're a guitarist, they use hammer-ons, pull-off slides and bends in rock music. Are you going to use those techniques? And you add all that information into your portfolio. And then you need to start annotating musical ideas and examples. So you might start coming up with some ideas that you might be using. Then you need to think about what's their instruments and their roles. So obviously your main instrument is going to have the melody, but then what other instruments are you going to use in there? Are you going to use an accompaniment? What instruments are you going to use? Are you going to have a rhythmic accompaniment as well? But whatever you choose, it should be characteristic of the style that you're using. And along the way, this may change anyway. You might find, that you're going to use keyboard, and then you decide you're not going to use it anymore as the accompaniment. Those things are a part of the process of doing a composition. Then the next thing you need to think about is what type of structure are you going to use? Is it going to be an intro, verse, chorus, bridge type of structure? Or is it going to be, say, in binary form where you just have two sections, A and B? And that all depends on what the type of style that you're choosing to base your composition on. And then start thinking about how you want each section to sound. And all this brainstorming you can put into your portfolio, and it's a good place for you to start. Then you might start mucking around with some chords that you might start wanting to use as the basis of your composition. So then that brings us up to the actual composition process. So like I said before, you might start playing with some chords as your basis. Or perhaps it might be a melody that you use, that you start off with. There are different ways of approaching how you do a composition, but the most common way is is to start off with some chords, and you develop your composition from there. It could be a chordal accompaniment, or it could be, if you're using rock, it could be a riff that you're using. The riff is usually based on chords. So you need to write down, start notating what those chords are after you start mucking around on your instrument, and coming up with a pattern that is going to be the beginnings of your composition. What rhythm pattern are you going to use for this riff? And then you have to ensure that your notation for your instrument is correct. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. At this stage, you should start notating straight away and start getting the ideas down. And as you're doing those ideas, you add them to your portfolio. I'll just give you an example. So here's an example of some chords. I'm using the guitar as my main instrument, and I'm just come up with a little chordal pattern of using the two chords G and C. This is how you play open G on a guitar. That's the correct way of notating it. So whatever notation, whatever instrument you use, you need to use the correct notation for that instrument. If I was going to play G chord on the piano, it would look totally different. So how you play it on the guitar, that's how it will look on the guitar. And so we'll just have a little listen. Okay, so that's my little chordal pattern that I'm doing at the beginning. And straight away I start notating. The next step is to start writing down some melodic ideas. When we're writing a melody, we usually use the notes of the chords. Now, if you don't know how to do that, I do have a little video on this YouTube channel of showing you how to use creating a melody using the chords and using what we call passing notes, which help fill out the melody. But when we start doing the melody, we want it to be singable. So we don't want it to sound like up and down in pitch, really jagged. And we wanted to develop them into phrases. Okay, so here is an example of where I've started out at a melody. The first 4 bars I've left just with the accompaniment, and from here, this is the main guitar, which is playing my main melody. It's a little melodic idea that is based on the chords of G and C. So if we have a little listen. Okay, so straight away it's starting to develop into like the first part of a verse. If I was putting it in the structure of a song where you have verse, chorus, verse, chorus. After you come up with the melody, then you start thinking about the accompaniment. So if this was piece that I'm doing was in a verse, I would develop those. I would repeat those chords and develop the melody a little bit more to create a verse. And a verse usually goes for about 16 bars. Once I've done that, then I start worrying about the accompaniment. So am I going to add other instruments like bass and drums? Perhaps I'm going to have a keyboard. Then the other thing to think about is when should they be added in? Maybe I might not add the bass and drums until verse 2 to create some variety. Whatever instruments you choose for your accompaniment, you must ensure that they are stylistically correct. So you wouldn't really be using, say, for instance, an oboe for a rock song. Okay, because it's not an instrument that's usually used in there. Even a flute, unless it's a particular type of rock style. So you need to think about what instruments you choose, and also too, you need to understand how those instruments are played when you add them into your music. Then that brings me to the next part, which is when you start adding your other layers, you need to ensure that you have the correct layout. Okay, so here is an example of a good way to lay out your composition. So the guitar is my main melody, is playing my main melody, so it should always be the top line, as we see here. Then we have the accompaniment instruments, so I've got another guitar that's playing the chordal accompaniment underneath. And then I'm going to introduce a bass on this line, so the bass will come under whatever accompaniment there. You might even add a keyboard in there between the guitar and bass, and then the final one will be my drum line, which I'll add in. So you should have the melody on the top line. Once you've got a structure, basic structure of a verse and a chorus, and another verse, and another chorus, and then perhaps a bridge, and then the ending, then you need to start really developing your composition. So first, like I said, you establish what your structure is going to be. Then you need to start thinking about what things you can do to develop it. So you can add instruments at certain times. They don't all have to start at the beginning. Some might come in verse 2, some might come in the chorus. If you're using vocals, harmonies can be used, say, in verse 2, and also in the second chorus to develop your composition. Going back to that vocal harmonies, if you don't have vocals, you could use like other instruments that are providing the harmony. So it might be a synthesizer or something like that. Having some variety in rhythms and melodies. So say your second verse can have a different type of rhythm in the bass, even in the drums, or perhaps the melodic line can have some variety in the rhythms and in the melodies to make it sound more interesting and not too repetitive. You should have, if you're having a verse chorus structure, you should have a bridge section which sounds totally different to the rest of the song. Perhaps you can have a change of key in there where you modulate to either the dominant or the relative minor to have a bit of difference in your composition. You can use other techniques like sequence, call and response to make your composition sound more interesting. And of course you can have imitations of the melody, the main melody, taken up by other instruments, by accompanying instruments in different sections of the songs. Not at the same time, but at different parts where they could fill out sections. And it also creates a little bit of unity. You might have a little coda at the end to finish off your composition. And of course, the last thing you should do is ensure that you have dynamics and expressive signs, louds and softs, crescendos, diminuendos in your piece, written into your notation of your piece. Okay, here's some advice for you, some tips. Start notating straight away. Do not leave it to the last minute. It is a big task to do. There are lots of great programs out there, notation programs. We tend to use Noteflight and Sibelius depending on the year level. When you're checking your notation, please ensure there are no clashes of notes. Also ensure that there's not too much repetition, that you have a lot of variety. Understand the capabilities of the instruments. Some students will choose to put a violin in their composition and have no understanding of how to play the violin, what the instrument is capable of. You need to understand what the range of instruments are so that you're not writing the notation outside of their range. And lastly, but most importantly, get feedback. So ask your teacher continuously to check your composition to ensure that you're on the right track. If you want to ask any questions, please just send me a message. I'm happy to help you, and I hope these videos will help you. Thanks.